Hello everyone, welcome back. We're talking about the development of the oral cavity, and in this section we'll deal with the development of salivary glands. As I've told you before, there are two types of salivary glands, the major and the minor salivary glands. We'll see what the denominations of the major salivary glands are, and what are the minor salivary glands, and what are their functions. So first of all, the development of the salivary glands. So they develop as solid outgrowths of epithelial cells which line the oral cavity. So these are the epithelial cells which are lining the oral cavity. They actually start or originate as solid cords that grow out of these epitheliums which are lining the oral cavity. Now the outgrowth, they branch repeatedly. Here you can see in the figure they are branching repeatedly, and they invade the surrounding mesenchyme. This is the mesenchymal area, so they invade the surrounding mesenchyme. Now the branches are solid cords of epithelial cells. So initially they are solid cords of epithelial cell which later canalize so that the lumen can carry the secretions which are being produced. So secretory acini, these are the secretory acini. They develop from the rounded terminal ends of the epithelial cords here. The rounded terminal ends of the epithelial cord form the secretory acini. The capsules, the septae, and the connective tissue of the glands are formed from the mesoderm. So there's an outpouching or an outgrowth from the epithelial lining of the oral cavity. This outgrowth tends to grow in the surrounding mesenchyme. Now it continues to branch. This branching is initially solid, however it later on becomes canalized and assumes a lumen because it has to carry the secretions. The secretions are produced by acini which are developed from the round terminal ends of the epithelial cords, as can be seen in the figure. And the septae, the lobules, and the connective tissue of the gland are derived from the mesenchyme into which the epithelial cells proliferate. So this is how the development of the salivary gland takes place. So now we have three major salivary glands. We have the parotid gland, the sublingual gland, and the submandibular gland. So let's see how the development of these glands takes place. So the parotid gland, this is the parotid gland. It develops as ectodermal outgrowth. So it's important, it's ectodermal in origin. So it develops as an ectodermal outgrowth from the cheek and at the angle of the stomodium. So here you can see this is the stomodium or the oral cavity, and this is the angle of the stomodium. At the angle of the stomodium, it develops from the cheek and it is ectodermal in origin. Now moving on, these are the sublingual glands. Sublingual glands are actually supernumerary. There are more than one in number. They develop as multiple endoderm. So now the important thing is these are endodermal in origin. They develop as multiple endodermal outgrowth from floor of the mouth. So this is the floor of the mouth, and sublingual glands, they actually develop from floor of the mouth, and they are multiple in number. And then finally we have the submandibular glands. They develop as endodermal outgrowth. Again, these are endodermal in origin from floor of the mouth. Here you can see in the figure, these are the endodermal outgrowths from the floor of the mouth. Now let's take a look at the parotid gland. So it develops during the 5th week of development. It is ectodermal in origin. It develops as an ectodermal furrow from the cheek at the angle of the stomodium. So this is the stomodium. This is the angle of the stomodium, and develops as a furrow at the angle of the stomodium. So now the medial end of the duct, this is the medial end. It opens into the angle of the primitive mouth. This is the angle of the primitive mouth. This entirety is the primitive mouth, and this is the angle. From its lateral end, this is the lateral end of the cord. The cords of ectodermal cells, they project into the surrounding mesenchyme. As the development of salivary gland takes place, the cords, they project into the mesenchyme and continue to branch to form the acini. Now, the cords are canalized to form acini and ductules of the parotid gland. We talked about it earlier. This is the development of salivary glands, and this is a set pattern. Now, the angle of mouth is shifted more medially due to fusion of the mandibular and the maxillary processes. So, the mandibular and the maxillary process, they fuse and they shift the angle of the mouth more medially. Now, in adults, the parotid gland opens into the vestibule of the mouth due to union of the maxillary and the mandibular processes, and that pushing the angle of the mouth more medially. So here you can see this is the parotid gland being developed in human fetus. Now, moving on, we have the submandibular gland. So, submandibular gland, they develop during 6th week. They develop as a solid endodermal outgrowth. Here you can see these are the submandibular glands. Now, they are endodermal in origin. They develop as solid endodermal outgrowth from floor of the stomodium, actually floor of the alveolo-lingual groove. So from the floor of the primitive mouth, this solid cord of cells is formed, which eventually develops into the submandibular glands. Now the endodermal outgrowth, they grow posteriorly and laterally to the developing tongue. So in this area, the tongue is being developed, and this mass that develops into the submandibular gland, it forms posterior and lateral to the developing tongue. Now, a linear groove is formed lateral to the tongue to form the submandibular duct and sublingual papillae. So these are the ducts, these are the submandibular ducts. So a groove is formed on the lateral aspect of the tongue, and this groove helps in the formation of the submandibular duct as well as the sublingual papillae. Now let's talk about the sublingual glands. They develop in the 8th week, so they are the last of the major salivary glands to develop as multiple endodermal outgrowths. So again, endodermal in origin, and here you can see they are multiple in number. So multiple endodermal outgrowths. These outgrowths are from the lingogingival sulcus and submandibular duct. So that formed at the last stage of development of the oral cavity. They are formed from the floor of the mouth, and they are endodermal in origin. Now each outgrowth, it canalizes separately and kind of opens independently on the summit of the sublingual fold. It may join to form a sublingual duct. However, it is not necessary that a sublingual duct may be present. Now, the summary of the major salivary glands. Let's talk about the parotid gland first. The parotid gland is ectodermal in origin. That is very important. It grows from the cheek at the angle of the stomodium, and the time of development is 5th week. Now the submandibular gland, it is endodermal in origin, which grows from floor of the mouth, and the developmental time is 6th week of development. Now sublingual gland is grows from multiple endodermal outgrowths from the floor of the lingogingival sulcus, and they develop during the 8th week of development. Now let's talk about the minor salivary glands. So these are small submucosal glands which are distributed throughout the wall of the oral cavity. So they are present throughout the wall of the oral cavity. Here you can see in this area they may be present, this area may be present. However, they are not present in the gums, not in the gingivae. So they are present small submucosal glands which are present throughout the oral cavity except for the gums. There is no or little branching because these are simple glands. They open independently on the surface of the oral mucosa. They do not have a major function. So this was all about the salivary gland. We talked about the two types of salivary glands, the different demarcations in the major salivary glands, and finally the minor salivary glands, their site and role in the human body. I hope you understood it. For further sections, keep watching sqadia.com.